The city pulsed with restless energy as dawn broke over the towering skyline. But for Clara Mendez, this day was unlike any other. Her reflection in the smudged subway window revealed a woman clutching the remnants of her hope in the form of a faded black blazer and a well-worn leather folder containing her resume. The air was thick with the kind of anticipation that teetered between exhilaration and dread. Emerging from the underground chaos, Clara found herself staring up at the building that could change her life. A skyscraper of mirrored glass that loomed like an untouchable titan. It was the headquarters of Montenegro Enterprises, a global empire built on the unshakable shoulders of Heitor Montenegro, a man as revered as he was feared. Her steps echoed in the cavernous marble lobby as she approached the reception desk. Every detail screamed opulence. The shimmering chandeliers, the crisp scent of money, and the icy gaze of the receptionist. "I'm here to see Mr. Montenegro," Clara said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Do you have an appointment?" The receptionist's tone was a scalpel, slicing through Clara's already fragile confidence. "No, but then I'm afraid." Before the woman could finish, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. A group of impeccably dressed executives exited, their polished shoes clicking against the marble. At the center of the group was a man who exuded authority like a force of nature. Heitor Montenegro. Clara's pulse quickened. This was her moment, one she had replayed 1,000 times in her mind. Without thinking, she surged forward, weaving through the startled executives until she stood directly in his path. "Mr. Montenegro," she called out, her voice ringing across the lobby. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Heitor stopped. His piercing gaze swept over her, his dark eyes narrowing in curiosity, or perhaps irritation. For a man who thrived on control, this unexpected disruption was clearly a rarity. "I just need 5 minutes of your time," Clara pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of her desperation. "Please." The air crackled with tension as his entourage exchanged disapproving glances, murmuring under their breath. The security guards began to approach, their heavy footsteps reverberating like an impending storm. But then, to everyone's shock, Heitor raised a hand. The guards froze. He tilted his head, studying Clara with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see right through her. 5 minutes, he said, his voice low and commanding, like the rumble of distant thunder. "But not here. Come with me." The room seemed to exhale as he turned on his heel and strode toward the elevators. Clara followed, her legs trembling but her resolve unshaken. Inside the sleek, mirrored elevator, the silence was deafening. Heitor stood like a statue, his chiseled profile betraying no emotion, while Clara fought to steady her breathing. When they reached his office, a sprawling expanse of glass and steel overlooking the city, he gestured for her to sit. The room radiated power, every detail meticulously designed to remind anyone who entered that they were in the presence of greatness. "Well?" he prompted, his voice sharp enough to cut through her hesitation. Clara launched into her story, pouring out her struggles, her qualifications, and her unyielding determination. Her words came in a torrent, driven by a fire she couldn't contain. Heitor listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, but his eyes never left hers. When she finished, the silence was suffocating. She braced herself for rejection, for the same dismissive words she had heard countless times before. But instead, Heitor leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. It wasn't a warm smile. It was enigmatic, as though he had just uncovered a puzzle piece he hadn't realized he was missing. "Come back tomorrow at 9, he said finally. "We'll see what you're made of." And just like that, Clara's world shifted. As she stepped out of his office, her heart racing, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just the beginning of a career. It was the beginning of something far greater, something she didn't yet understand. The morning light spilled across Clara's modest apartment as she stood before her cracked bathroom mirror, practicing her posture. Today wasn't just any day. It was her chance to prove herself. Her clothes were pressed to perfection, though they still betrayed the strain of too many years of careful mending. Her heart, however, was unwavering. Arriving at Montenegro Enterprises just before 9, Clara felt the oppressive weight of the building more than ever. She clutched her folder tightly as the elevator carried her upward, the numbers on the digital display climbing like a countdown to an unknown fate. When the doors opened, the air was cooler, sharper, a reflection of the man who waited for her. Heitor Montenegro sat at the head of a sleek conference table, his tailored suit emphasizing every bit of his commanding presence. The room was filled with his top executives, all of them radiating skepticism as Clara entered. She swallowed hard but didn't falter. This wasn't just an interview, it was a battlefield. "Miss Mendez," Heitor said, his tone devoid of warmth but not unkind. "You wanted 5 minutes yesterday. Today you'll have 15 to convince me and them why you deserve to be here." Clara's eyes scanned the room. The executives weren't just here to observe. They were predators circling prey, ready to pounce on any sign of weakness. She had never been more aware of her patched blazer and scuffed shoes, but she refused to let them define her. "Thank you, Mr. Montenegro," she began, her voice steady despite the thundering in her chest. "And thank you all for your time." She launched into her presentation, with the precision of someone who had rehearsed it 100 times in her mind. She spoke of strategies, of overlooked opportunities within Montenegro Enterprises' operations, and of her ability to bring fresh, untapped perspectives to the table. Her words were a blend of data-driven logic and unyielding passion. The executives whispered among themselves, their expressions a mix of doubt and begrudging curiosity. Heitor, however, remained silent, his eyes fixed on Clara with an intensity that made her feel as if the rest of the room didn't exist. As her time drew to a close, Clara decided to take a risk. "I know I'm not what you're used to," she said, meeting Heitor's gaze directly. "But I don't see that as a disadvantage. I see it as exactly what this company needs." The room fell silent. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. Then, Heitor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that flickered between amusement and intrigue. "You're bold, Miss Mendez," he said. "I'll give you that. And boldness can be a dangerous thing in this world." The tension in the room was palpable as he paused. Clara's pulse pounded in her ears. "But," he continued, "sometimes danger is exactly what we need." He rose from his seat, signaling the end of the meeting. "You'll start as a project assistant under me. Prove you're more than words." Clara's breath caught. She barely managed to nod as the room emptied, the executives filing out with murmured disapproval. When the door closed, she was left alone with Heitor. "Why did you take the risk?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost curious. "Because it's all I have left," Clara replied, her honesty surprising even herself. For the first time, Heitor's expression softened, just enough for her to wonder what lay beneath his carefully constructed exterior. But before she could say more, he turned away, already lost in his thoughts. Clara left the office with her heart racing, the weight of the opportunity and the challenge pressing down on her. She had won a battle, but the war had only just begun. The first day of Clara's new position began with an overwhelming sense of both triumph and dread. As she stepped into Montenegro Enterprises again, the whispers followed her like shadows. She could feel the weight of judgment from the employees who passed her, their polished shoes and designer attire a sharp contrast to her modest presence. She didn't care. Clara had fought too hard to stand where she was now, and no amount of disdain would break her resolve. Her desk, a sleek, minimalistic setup tucked just outside Heitor Montenegro's private office, felt like both a fortress and a prison. She barely had time to settle before her phone buzzed. "Come in," his deep voice commanded through the intercom. Clara straightened her blazer, inhaled deeply, and stepped into his office. The sprawling view of the city was almost dizzying, but not as much as the man sitting behind the imposing desk. Heitor's sharp suit was unyielding, much like his expression as he gestured for her to approach. "Your first task," he said, sliding a file across the desk. "There's a critical meeting with our Japanese investors tomorrow. I want a complete analysis of their portfolio risks and potential synergies. On my desk by tonight." Clara opened the file, her eyes scanning the dense pages of financial data and corporate jargon. It was a daunting task, but she nodded firmly. "Understood." Heitor's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer. "Let me be clear, Miss Mendez. This isn't charity. I don't have time for incompetence. If you can't deliver, you won't last." His words stung, but they also fueled her. "I won't let you down," she replied, her voice steady. Back at her desk, Clara dove into the file. Hours passed as she sifted through reports and spreadsheets, her mind racing to piece together insights. The office buzzed around her, but she barely noticed. When her eyes blurred from the screen's glare, she grabbed a coffee from the break room, ignoring the sideways glances and muttered comments from her new colleagues. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the city, Clara was still at her desk. Her stomach growled in protest, but she pushed the hunger aside. She was so close. Every number, every note had to be perfect. As the office emptied, she finally printed the final report, carefully bound it, and walked to Hyder's office. The lights inside were still on. She knocked softly before entering. Hyder looked up from his computer, his expression as unreadable as ever. Without a word, Clara placed the report on his desk. He opened it, flipping through the pages with the precision of someone who missed nothing. The silence was unbearable. Clara's palms grew damp as she waited, each second stretching endlessly. Finally, he closed the report and leaned back in his chair. "Impressive," he said, his tone neutral, but there was a glimmer of something in his eyes. Approval? Curiosity? She couldn't tell. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've set a high standard for yourself," he added. "Let's see if you can maintain it." As Clara left his office, her exhaustion was overshadowed by a flicker of pride. She had proven herself, at least for today. But she knew this was just the beginning. Hyder Montenegro wasn't a man who would be easily impressed again. The morning after her first victory at Montenegro Enterprises, Clara awoke with a mixture of exhilaration and unease. She had made it through her first test, but the memory of Hyder's unflinching gaze lingered. She couldn't decide whether it was his approval or a calculated assessment, as though he were weighing her worth. Arriving at the office early, Clara found her desk already stacked with more files. Each folder was labeled with cryptic titles: projects, financial reports, and competitive analyses. It was clear that Hyder Montenegro intended to push her to the limit. At exactly 9:15 a.m., his voice came through the intercom. "Miss Mendez, my office." Her pulse quickened as she walked through the glass doors. Hyder was standing by the window, his hands in his pockets, staring out at the bustling city below. For a moment he didn't acknowledge her, as if he were testing her patience. Finally he turned, his eyes locking onto hers. "You handled yourself well yesterday," he said, his tone measured. "But competence isn't enough. To thrive here, you'll need to anticipate problems before they arise." He gestured to a chair, and Clara sat, feeling the weight of his scrutiny. He slid a thin, black folder across the table. "Inside are the details of a property acquisition," he explained. "It's a delicate negotiation. The seller is hesitant, and our competitors are circling. I want you to attend the meeting as an observer. Pay attention, take notes, and tell me what you learn." Clara's eyes widened. "You want me to sit in on a negotiation?" "Yes," he said sharply. "Is that a problem?" "No," she replied quickly. "Of course not." The meeting took place in a luxurious conference room on the 37th floor. Clara sat at the edge of the table, her notepad ready, as Hyder and his team took their seats. Across from them was the seller, a cautious older man accompanied by his attorney. The tension in the room was palpable. Hyder dominated the conversation, his voice calm but commanding as he laid out the terms of the deal. He was ruthless but eloquent, dismantling objections with precision. Clara watched, mesmerized, as he controlled the room with an ease that bordered on artistry. But halfway through, she noticed something others seemed to miss: a subtle shift in the seller's demeanor. His posture stiffened, his eyes darting nervously to his attorney. Clara's instincts flared. Something wasn't right. After the meeting ended, Hyder's team dispersed, but he remained in the room, flipping through his notes. Clara hesitated before approaching him. "Mr. Montenegro," she began cautiously, "I think the seller is more hesitant than he let on." Hyder looked up, his expression unreadable. "Go on." He kept glancing at his attorney whenever you mentioned the timeline. "I think they're under pressure to close quickly, but they don't want to reveal it." For a moment, Hyder said nothing. Then, to Clara's surprise, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Interesting," he said. "And what would you do with that information?" Clara's heart raced. I'd use it to our advantage. Propose a slightly faster timeline than usual, but with conditions that ensure we maintain control. It might push them to agree without realizing they've compromised. Hyder's eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of something. Respect, perhaps. Not bad, he said finally. I'll consider it. As Clara left the room, she felt a surge of pride tempered by caution. She had earned another small victory, but every step forward seemed to draw her deeper into Hyder's world, a world where every move was a calculated gamble. The days that followed Clara's breakthrough in the negotiation were a whirlwind of work and scrutiny. She was no longer the invisible newcomer. Her presence in the office began to draw attention, both curious and critical. Whispers followed her in the hallways, mingling admiration with suspicion. By the end of the week, Clara found herself summoned once again to Heitor Montenegro's office. This time, the atmosphere felt different. His assistant greeted her with an arched brow, as if questioning what she had done to earn so much of his attention. When Clara entered, Heitor was seated at his desk, reviewing documents with laser focus. He gestured for her to sit without looking up. I've reviewed the reports from the acquisition team, he said after a moment. Your suggestion was implemented. It expedited the deal without compromising our position. Clara's heart leapt. I'm glad it was helpful. Heider's eyes flicked to hers, sharp and assessing. Helpful, yes. But understand this, Miss Mendez. One success doesn't define you, and one failure can erase it. His words landed like a challenge, and Clara met his gaze with a quiet resolve. I understand. That evening, as she packed up to leave, Clara's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Meet me in the lobby at 8 p.m. Don't be late. H. Montenegro. Clara's breath caught. She stared at the screen, debating whether this was a test of her loyalty, her dedication, or something else entirely. At precisely 8 p.m., she stood in the opulent lobby, her nerves taut. When Heitor appeared, he was without his usual entourage, dressed in a tailored navy coat that softened his sharp edges but did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. Follow me, he said simply. They exited the building into the crisp night air, where a sleek black car waited. Clara hesitated but climbed in, her curiosity outweighing her caution. The city lights blurred as they drove through the bustling streets, the silence between them heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, the car stopped in front of an exclusive restaurant. Clara recognized it immediately. It was the kind of place reserved for power brokers and celebrities. Inside, they were led to a private room, its understated elegance accentuated by candlelight. Clara's mind raced. Was this a business meeting? A test of her ability to navigate high society? As they sat, Heitor leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. You've made an impression, Miss Mendez. That's not easy to do. Thank you, she said, cautiously. But I'm not sure why I'm here. Heitor smirked, a rare expression that softened his otherwise guarded demeanor. You're here because I need to know what drives you. People with your determination usually have a story behind it. Clara hesitated, her guard instinctively rising. But there was something in his tone, curiosity, perhaps even respect, that coaxed her to speak. I grew up watching my parents struggle, she admitted. They worked harder than anyone I've ever known, but they never got ahead. I promised myself I wouldn't let that be my story. Heitor nodded as if he had expected her answer. Ambition, he said. It's a double-edged sword. And what about you? Clara countered, surprising even herself with the boldness of her question. What drives you? For a moment, Heitor seemed caught off guard. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. Power, he said simply, and the freedom it brings. Their eyes locked, and Clara felt a shift, something subtle but undeniable. For the first time, the distance between them seemed to narrow, the carefully constructed walls of professionalism giving way to something more personal. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the moment passed. Heitor straightened, his expression once again impenetrable. This isn't a friendship, Miss Mendez, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Remember that. Clara nodded, her emotions swirling in ways she couldn't quite decipher. As the dinner ended and the car carried her back to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a game far more complex and far more dangerous than she had anticipated. The following morning, Clara stepped into the office with an uneasy mix of confidence and uncertainty. The dinner with Hightor lingered in her mind, the memory of his cryptic words and piercing gaze haunting her thoughts. She reminded herself of his warning. This isn't a friendship. The day began like any other, with files waiting on her desk and deadlines looming. But there was something in the air, a tension she couldn't quite place. Whispers floated through the corridors as colleagues glanced at her with thinly veiled curiosity. It didn't take long for Clara to realize she was at the center of the office's newest storm. At lunchtime, a colleague named Adriana, a senior project manager with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, approached her desk. Clara had noticed her before. She exuded confidence and wielded influence like a weapon. "So," Adriana began, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "you're the new favorite." Clara blinked, taken aback. "I'm just doing my job." Adriana's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I'm sure you are, but don't think for a second that everyone here is thrilled about your rapid ascent." Clara's stomach tightened. "I don't know what you mean." Adriana leaned in slightly, her voice low. "Word travels fast, Clara. People are wondering how someone with no connections got this close to Mr. Montenegro. Be careful. This place isn't as glamorous as it looks." Before Clara could respond, Adriana walked away, leaving a trail of perfume and unease in her wake. Clara returned to her work, but the words stayed with her, gnawing at the edges of her focus. That evening, as she prepared to leave, her phone buzzed with a message from Hightor. "Stay late. We need to discuss tomorrow's presentation." Clara sighed. It wasn't the first time her personal time had been sacrificed for the job, and she doubted it would be the last. She stayed at her desk, reviewing the presentation slides until the office was nearly empty. At 9 p.m., she was called into Hightor's office. He was pacing, his jacket draped over the back of a chair, sleeves rolled up. The sight of him like this, unpolished, intense, was both unsettling and fascinating. "Sit," he said without looking at her. Clara obeyed, placing her laptop on the table. He leaned over the screen as she walked him through the presentation. Hightor interrupted frequently, pointing out flaws, demanding clarity, and pushing her to justify every decision. "You're thorough," he said finally, sitting back in his chair. "But thoroughness isn't enough. Anticipate what they'll ask before they ask it. Think 3 moves ahead." Clara nodded, absorbing his words like a sponge. "I'll adjust it tonight." Hightor studied her for a moment, his expression softening just slightly. "Do you know why I gave you this chance?" The question caught her off guard. "No," she admitted. "Because you remind me of someone I used to know," he said, his voice quieter now. "Someone who fought as hard as you do, but they didn't understand the cost." Clara frowned, unsure how to respond. Before she could ask what he meant, he stood and walked to the window, his silhouette stark against the city lights. "You're talented, Clara," he continued, his tone unreadable. "But this world has a way of breaking people who aren't ready for it." "I am ready," she said firmly, surprising even herself. Hightor turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "We'll see." As Clara left the office that night, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Adriana's warning, Hightor's cryptic remarks, and the weight of her own ambitions pressed heavily on her. She had entered this world with nothing but determination, but it was becoming increasingly clear that success came with unseen costs. The elevator doors closed, and Clara stared at her reflection in the polished steel. For the first time, she wondered if the person she saw would still exist at the end of this journey. The presentation day arrived, and with it came a storm of nerves. Clara had spent the night refining every slide, rehearsing her points until she could recite them in her sleep. Yet, as she stood in the towering glass-walled boardroom, surrounded by Montenegro's most senior executives and the intimidating clients they sought to impress, her confidence faltered. Hightor Montenegro entered last, his presence commanding the room's immediate attention. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his sharp eyes scanned the attendees before briefly resting on Clara. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, enough to steady her nerves. Clara began the presentation. Her voice was firm, her words clear. As she spoke, she could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, dissecting her every word. Questions came fast and sharp from the clients, and each time, Clara responded with precision, her earlier rehearsals proving invaluable. Hightor observed in silence, his hands steepled as he watched her navigate the room with growing confidence. It wasn't until the final slide that Clara allowed herself to exhale. The room erupted in polite applause, and the clients exchanged approving nods. "Well done," one of them said, rising from his chair to shake her hand. "You've clearly done your homework." Clara smiled, her chest swelling with pride. As the meeting concluded and the room began to empty, Heido remained seated, his gaze fixed on her. "Stay," he said simply. Once they were alone, Heido rose and walked to the window, his back to her. "You exceeded expectations," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "But success in this room isn't enough." Clara frowned. "I don't understand." He turned to face her, his expression hard. "The people who praised you today, they'll tear you down tomorrow if it suits their agenda. This world isn't fair, Clara. It rewards power, not effort." She met his gaze, her voice steady despite the weight of his words. "Then I'll find a way to have both." A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed his face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Ambition is dangerous, Miss Mendez. It has a way of consuming everything else." Later that evening, Clara found herself alone in the office, finishing up loose ends. The success of the presentation had sparked a fire in her, and she was determined to build on it. Yet Adriana's words from days before still lingered. "Be careful. This place isn't as glamorous as it looks." A knock at her desk startled her. She looked up to see Adriana, leaning casually against the partition. Her sharp smile carried the same calculated edge as before. "Congratulations," Adriana said, her voice smooth. "You survived your first trial by fire." "Thank you," Clara replied, wary of the compliment. Adriana tilted her head, studying her like a chess master analyzing a new piece. "You're good, Clara. Better than I expected. But you should know, there's a reason people here don't trust meteoric rises. They usually come with strings attached." Clara's brow furrowed. "What are you trying to say?" Adriana's smile widened. "I'm saying that being close to Montenegro is both a privilege and a curse. Don't let the shine blind you to the shadows." With that, she walked away, leaving Clara to grapple with the cryptic warning. As Clara stepped into the cool night air, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled into a game far more intricate than she had anticipated. Hayter's words about ambition, Adriana's veiled cautions, and the unspoken dynamics of Montenegro Enterprises all swirled in her mind. Success was no longer just about hard work. It was about survival. And Clara Mendez was determined to win. The morning after the presentation, Clara walked into the office with a strange sense of calm. The glow of success still lingered, but Adriana's warning and Heider's cryptic remarks weighed heavily on her mind. She could feel the undercurrent of tension in the air, as though the building itself was alive with secrets she wasn't yet privy to. At her desk, a neatly folded note rested atop a new stack of files. The handwriting was bold and unmistakable. "Conference room, 10 a.m., H. Montenegro." The message was short, but its implications loomed large. Clara glanced at the clock. She had 30 minutes to prepare, but for what? The files contained only vague outlines, numbers, projections, and meeting agendas that gave no clear picture of what lay ahead. When 10 a.m. arrived, she entered the conference room to find not just Heider but a group of high-ranking executives, including Adriana. They all turned as Clara stepped inside, the weight of their scrutiny like a spotlight. "Take a seat," Heider said, gesturing to an empty chair beside him. Clara obeyed, her heart pounding. Heider's demeanor was as unreadable as ever, but Adriana's sharp gaze sent a clear message. "You're in my territory now." The meeting began. A flurry of financial jargon and strategic debates filling the room. Clara listened intently, taking notes, trying to piece together the larger picture. It became clear that the discussion centered on a high-stakes acquisition, a deal that could cement Montenegro Enterprises' dominance in a key market. Halfway through, Heider turned to Clara. "Your thoughts, Miss Mendez?" The question caught her off guard, but she masked her surprise. "I believe the proposed terms are solid, but there's a risk in underestimating the competition. They've been quiet lately, which suggests they're waiting for the right moment to counter." A murmur spread through the room. Adriana raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "And what would you suggest we do about it?" Clara took a steadying breath. "Preemptive action. Strengthen our position by securing exclusive partnerships with key suppliers. It's more costly up front, but could block the competition from gaining a foothold." The room fell silent. Hyder's gaze lingered on Clara, his expression betraying a hint of approval. "She's right," he said finally. "Draft a proposal incorporating her recommendations. I want it on my desk by tomorrow." Adriana's jaw tightened, but she nodded, her veneer of professionalism intact. As the meeting adjourned, Clara couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. But as she gathered her notes, Adriana approached her voice low enough that only Clara could hear. "You're clever," Adriana said, her tone tinged with both respect and warning. "But cleverness has a price in this place. Be ready to pay it." That evening, Clara stayed late, her desk lit only by the soft glow of her computer screen. The office was eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by an oppressive stillness. As she worked on the proposal, her mind kept drifting to Adriana's words. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. Clara tensed, her pulse quickening. When the shadow appeared in the doorway, she exhaled sharply. It was Hyder. "Still here?" he asked, stepping into the room. "Finishing the proposal," she replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. Hyder nodded, his gaze sweeping over her desk before settling on her. "You handled yourself well today, but you need to be careful." "Careful of what?" Clara asked, unable to hide the edge in her voice. Hyder's lips curved into a faint, almost amused smile. "Of trusting the wrong people," she frowned. "Do you mean Adriana?" "I mean everyone," he said simply. "This world is built on alliances and betrayals, Miss Mendez. Never forget that." Hyder turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "Don't stay too late. The shadows here have a way of creeping into places they don't belong." With that, he was gone, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. She stared at her computer screen, the glow illuminating her face as she tried to decipher his words. Success at Montenegro Enterprises was proving to be far more than a test of skill. It was a game of survival, where every move carried unseen consequences. And Clara was determined to play it, no matter the cost. The following morning, Clara arrived early at Montenegro Enterprises, determined to finalize the proposal before the day's chaos unfolded. Her confidence had grown after her performance in the boardroom, but she knew she was far from secure. Every decision, every word, seemed to carry the weight of scrutiny from both her peers and Hyder himself. When the clock struck 9, she delivered the finished proposal to Hyder's office. He was already there, his sharp focus locked on a document in front of him. Without looking up, he gestured for her to place the folder on his desk. As Clara turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Sit." She obeyed, her heart pounding as Hyder flipped through the pages of her proposal. The silence stretched, the only sound the faint rustle of paper. Finally, he set the folder down and met her gaze. "It's good," he said. "Better than I expected." A wave of relief washed over Clara, but it was short-lived. "However," he continued, "you've underestimated one thing, the human factor." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" "Numbers and strategy are only part of the equation," he said, leaning forward. "People are unpredictable. They act on fear, greed, and ego. You can anticipate trends and projections all you want, but if you don't understand the players, you'll lose before the game even starts." Clara nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I'll revise the proposal to include—" "No," Hyder interrupted. "This isn't about revising. It's about learning. That's why you're coming with me today." "Coming where?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "To a meeting with one of our most difficult partners," he replied. "You'll see firsthand what I mean." Later that day, Clara found herself seated beside Hyder in the back of a sleek black car, her nerves simmering as they drove through the city. The destination was a high-end private club, a place she'd only ever seen in magazines, where power and wealth converged in an unspoken pact of exclusivity. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed and opulent. They were led to a secluded room where a man in his 60s awaited them. His tailored suit and sharp features exuded authority, but there was a weariness in his eyes that hinted at years of battles fought and deals made. "Victor," Hyder said smoothly, extending a hand. "Always a pleasure." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Hyder, I hear you've been busy." The two men exchanged pleasantries that barely masked the tension beneath. Clara sat quietly, observing as Hyder navigated the conversation with precision. It was a delicate dance, flattery and firmness, charm and challenge. But then Victor's tone shifted. "Your proposal is ambitious, Hyder. Perhaps too ambitious. I'm not sure my board will agree to these terms. Hyder's expression didn't waver. Your board knows what's at stake. This deal benefits all of us, but hesitation will only give our competitors an edge. Victor's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? It's a fact, Hyder replied evenly. Clara's pulse quickened as the tension in the room thickened. She could see Victor's resolve wavering, his confidence eroding under Hyder's unwavering gaze. It was then that Clara noticed something, a flicker of vulnerability in Victor's expression when Hyder mentioned competitors. It was subtle, but it was there. Mr. Montenegro, Clara said, speaking up for the first time. Both men turned to her, their surprise evident. She felt the weight of their attention but pressed on. I believe Mr. Victor's hesitation isn't about the terms themselves. It's about timing. He's concerned that committing too soon could expose his company to unnecessary risk. Victor's eyes widened slightly, a reaction he quickly masked. Hyder's gaze flicked back to Victor, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Interesting, Hyder said. Is she right, Victor? Victor hesitated, then sighed. Perhaps, but mitigating risk isn't a crime, Hyder. It's survival. And survival often requires bold moves, Hyder countered. Like this one. The conversation shifted after that, the tension softening as Victor began to reconsider. By the time they left, the framework for the deal was in place. As they returned to the car, Hyder broke the silence. You saw what I meant about the human factor. Clara nodded. It's not just about logic, it's about reading people. Exactly, he said. You have a sharp eye, Clara, but don't let it dull. His words felt like both a compliment and a warning. Clara stared out the window as the city blurred past, her mind racing. She had earned another victory, but the stakes seemed to climb with every step she took. She was no longer just playing the game, she was becoming part of it. The deal with Victor marked a new chapter for Clara. She had proven her value, not just to Hyder, but to the watchful eyes of Montenegro Enterprises as a whole. Yet, with every step forward, the weight of the unspoken truths around her grew heavier. The whispers in the office had shifted. Clara was no longer dismissed as an outsider, but scrutinized as someone too close to Hyder Montenegro's orbit. The unease was palpable, especially in the glances exchanged by colleagues who seemed to envy and mistrust her in equal measure. One such glance came from Adriana, whose sharp gaze lingered on Clara as they crossed paths in the hallway. Another feather in your cap, Adriana remarked, her tone a mixture of sarcasm and something darker. Victor was a tough nut to crack. Team effort, Clara replied evenly, refusing to rise to the bait. Of course, Adriana said, her smile cold. Just remember, alliances here shift like the wind. Don't get too comfortable. Later that evening, Clara was called into Hyder's office. The room was dimly lit, the city's lights casting a soft glow across the glass walls. Hyder stood by the window, his posture relaxed, but his expression as intense as ever. You've handled yourself well these past weeks, he began, his tone neutral. But success here doesn't come without risks. I'm beginning to realize that, Clara admitted, stepping closer. Hyder turned to face her, his eyes piercing. You're being watched, Clara. Every move you make, every word you say, someone is keeping track. Clara frowned. Adriana? She's one of many, he said, but Adriana is particularly territorial. She sees you as a threat. And am I? Clara asked, unable to hide the edge in her voice. Hyder's lips curved into a faint smirk. Not yet, but you could be. The cryptic remark hung in the air. Before Clara could press further, Hyder's phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. I have to deal with something, he said. Stay late tonight. There's a project I need you to start. He handed her a thick file before walking out, leaving Clara alone in the vast, silent office. The hours ticked by as Clara worked, the solitude of the office amplifying every sound, the hum of the air conditioning, the soft tapping of her keyboard. She was deeply engrossed in the file when a flicker of movement caught her attention. She glanced up, her heart skipping a beat. A figure stood at the edge of the hallway, partially obscured by shadow. Clara's pulse quickened. Hello? She called out, her voice echoing slightly. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it disappeared around the corner. Clara hesitated, then rose from her desk, her curiosity outweighing her apprehension. She followed the sound of soft footsteps, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The hallway was deserted. Clara turned the corner, finding only the faint hum of the elevator. Whoever had been there was gone. When she returned to her desk, her nerves were on edge. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it Adriana? Someone else from the office? Or was it her imagination playing tricks on her after weeks of relentless pressure? As Clara resumed her work, her phone buzzed. A single text appeared on the screen from an unknown number. "Be careful who you trust." Her breath hitched. She stared at the message, her hands trembling slightly. Who had sent it? And why? When she finally left the office, the city was cloaked in darkness, the streets illuminated by the glow of streetlights. Clara clutched her bag tightly as she walked to the subway. Her senses heightened. Every shadow felt alive, every sound amplified. She couldn't shake the feeling that the game she was playing was more dangerous than she had imagined. The thin veil of success she had built was fragile, and beneath it lay a web of secrets, alliances, and betrayals she was only beginning to uncover. The next day, Clara arrived at the office with the ominous text still replaying in her mind. She had tried to dismiss it as a harmless prank, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Every glance from a coworker seemed suspicious. Every whisper felt like it was about her. Her first meeting of the day was with Hightor. He greeted her with his usual stoic demeanor, though his sharp eyes seemed to study her more closely than usual. "You look distracted," he said as she entered his office. Clara hesitated, debating whether to mention the text. "Just tired," she lied. Hightor didn't look convinced, but didn't press further. Instead, he gestured for her to sit. "We have a problem." He slid a file across the desk. Clara opened it to find a series of emails and reports detailing irregularities in a major deal Montenegro Enterprises had recently closed. "Someone's leaking information," Hightor said, his voice low. "Confidential details about our operations are getting to the competition." Clara's stomach tightened. "Do you know who it is?" "Not yet," Hightor replied, "but it's someone with access to high-level information." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze piercing. "I need you to look into this." Clara blinked. "Me?" "Yes," he said firmly. "You're still new here, which makes you less likely to be involved, and you have a knack for noticing things others miss." Clara's mind raced. Investigating a potential mole in a company like Montenegro Enterprises was dangerous territory, but the determination in Hightor's voice left no room for negotiation. "I'll do my best," she said finally. As the day unfolded, Clara began her quiet investigation. She reviewed emails, scrutinized meeting notes, and paid closer attention to her colleagues. Adriana, with her sharp wit and guarded demeanor, naturally caught her attention. But there were others, too. Executives who seemed overly curious about her work, assistants who lingered near her desk for no apparent reason. By the afternoon, Clara had compiled a list of potential suspects. At the top was Adriana. Her territorial nature and pointed remarks made her an obvious candidate, but Clara knew better than to jump to conclusions. Her chance to dig deeper came unexpectedly. That evening, while returning to her desk from the break room, she saw Adriana entering one of the smaller conference rooms, her posture tense. Clara hesitated, then followed quietly, keeping a safe distance. The door to the conference room was ajar, and Clara could hear hushed voices inside. She crept closer, her heart pounding. "We can't keep stalling," Adriana was saying, her tone low but urgent. "If Montenegro finds out—" The sound of footsteps approaching the hallway made Clara retreat quickly. She ducked behind a nearby corner, just as Adriana exited the room, her expression unreadable. Clara stayed hidden until the hallway was clear, then slipped into the conference room. It was empty, but a folder lay open on the table. She glanced at its contents. A series of charts and emails related to an upcoming deal. None of it looked suspicious on the surface, but why had Adriana seemed so tense? That night, as Clara reviewed her notes at home, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was chillingly specific. "Stay out of things that don't concern you." Clara's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen. Someone knew what she was doing, and they were warning her to stop. But Clara wasn't the type to back down. If anything, the message only strengthened her resolve. Whoever was behind the leaks and the threats wasn't just a danger to the company. They were a danger to her. The next morning, Clara confronted Hightor in his office. "I think I'm being watched," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. Hyder's expression darkened. Explain. She recounted the messages and her observations, including Adriana's suspicious behavior. Hyder listened in silence, his jaw tightening as she spoke. "You're in deeper than I intended," he said finally. "This is more serious than I thought." "What do we do?" Clara asked. Hyder's gaze was unwavering. "We find out who's behind this, but we do it carefully. Trust no one." The morning after Clara's conversation with Hyder, the air in Montenegro Enterprises felt heavier. Every glance, every quiet exchange between colleagues seemed loaded with hidden meanings. Clara carried the weight of her new mission silently, her eyes scanning for any detail that might unravel the growing mystery. Her first step was subtle, cross-referencing the emails in the leaked reports with internal access logs. The task was tedious and required hours of poring over spreadsheets and encrypted files. By mid-afternoon, her efforts bore fruit. A pattern emerged. The leaks were tied to a shared access account, one that several high-level employees, including Adriana, had used over the past month. Adriana again. Clara's instincts told her she was onto something, but she needed more. That evening, Clara stayed late, well after most of the office had emptied. She knew Adriana often worked late, too, which gave her an opportunity. At 9:30 p.m., she saw the glow of a desk lamp in Adriana's office. Clara waited, pretending to organize her files, until Adriana stepped out, heading toward the break room. The opportunity was fleeting, but Clara took it. She slipped into Adriana's office and scanned the desk. Among neatly stacked papers, she found a small notebook tucked under a report. Flipping it open, Clara's breath hitched. Inside were notes referencing meetings that didn't match the official company calendar and mentions of Project Horizon, a name she hadn't seen in any of her work. Before she could process further, a voice cut through the silence. "Looking for something?" Clara froze. Adriana stood in the doorway, her arms crossed and her eyes narrowing like a predator closing in on prey. Clara began, but Adriana stepped closer, her tone sharp. "Spare me the excuses? You think I don't see what you're doing? You're in over your head, Mendez." "I'm just trying to do my job," Clara replied, standing her ground despite the pounding of her heart. Adriana's laugh was cold. "Your job? Is that what Montenegro told you? Let me guess, he sent you to observe, didn't he? To dig into things that don't concern you." Clara remained silent, her mind racing. Adriana's words weren't just a threat, they were a confirmation. She knew about the leaks, maybe even more. "Here's some advice," Adriana said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Walk away, you don't understand the stakes." Clara returned to her desk, her hands trembling as she replayed the encounter in her mind. Adriana was clearly hiding something, but her warning carried an edge of truth. What were the stakes, and how deep did they go? As she packed up to leave, another message buzzed on her phone. "You've been warned. Stop now or you'll regret it." The sender was still anonymous, but the threat was unmistakable. Clara leaned back in her chair, the weight of fear pressing down on her. Someone was watching her every move, and they wanted her to back off. But she couldn't. She was in too deep. The next morning, Clara reported everything to Hyder, including her confrontation with Adriana and the new threat. He listened intently, his expression growing darker with every word. "She's hiding something," Clara concluded. "The notes, the meetings, they don't align with anything official." Hyder stood, pacing to the window. "Adriana's ambitious, but this goes beyond ambition. If she's involved, she's not working alone." Clara hesitated. "What do we do?" Hyder turned to her, his gaze colder than she'd ever seen. "We push back, hard, but we do it my way." By midday, Hyder had called a surprise meeting with Adriana and several other key executives, Clara included. The tension was electric as everyone gathered in the glass-walled conference room. Adriana sat across from Clara, her expression calm, but her eyes watchful. "Recent developments have come to my attention," Hyder began, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Confidential information has been leaked to competitors. This is a betrayal of trust and a threat to everything this company stands for." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "I will not tolerate it." Adriana's expression didn't falter, but Clara noticed her hands tightening around her pen. Hyder continued, outlining new security measures and investigations that would leave no stone unturned. His message was clear. Whoever was responsible would be caught and dealt with. As the meeting adjourned, Adriana shot Clara a look that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't anger. It was a warning. That evening, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. The shadows on the street seemed to move with her, and every sound felt amplified. When she finally reached her apartment, she bolted the door and collapsed onto the couch, her mind racing. The game she was playing had escalated. "Trust no one," Hyder had said. But with the walls closing in, Clara began to wonder if she could even trust herself. The morning came shrouded in a foreboding haze. Clara had barely slept, her thoughts consumed by Adriana's warnings, the anonymous threats, and Hyder's cold resolve. The stakes had reached a dangerous crescendo, and Clara felt as though she was walking a tightrope stretched over a pit of unseen dangers. When she arrived at Montenegro Enterprises, the usual hum of the office felt charged, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Clara's desk bore no new assignments, only a note from Hyder, brief and commanding. "Meet me in my office at 10. The clock seemed to move agonizingly slow, each tick amplifying her nerves. Finally, she stepped into Hyder's office to find him already on the phone, his voice low and clipped. He gestured for her to sit. When he ended the call, he turned to her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "We have confirmation," he said. "Adriana is involved." Clara's heart raced. "How do you know?" "She's been using a secondary server to communicate with someone outside the company. Our IT team traced the activity. It's sophisticated but sloppy. She thought she was untouchable." "What happens now?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Hyder's gaze hardened. "I've already informed security. She'll be escorted out today and will pursue legal action for the leaks." Clara nodded, but a question lingered in her mind. "And the person she's working with? Do we know who it is?" Hyder's silence was answer enough. He didn't know, or worse, he wasn't saying. The confrontation came faster than Clara expected. By noon, Adriana's name was called over the intercom, summoning her to Hyder's office. Clara watched from her desk as Adriana walked past, her stride confident, her expression unreadable. Time seemed to stretch as the meeting unfolded behind closed doors. Then, the doors burst open, and Adriana emerged flanked by 2 security guards. Her calm facade had cracked, her eyes burned with a mixture of rage and defiance. As she was escorted out, Adriana's gaze locked onto Clara's. "You think this is over?" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You have no idea what you've started." The words hit Clara like a slap. She stayed rooted to her chair as Adriana disappeared into the elevator, her mind swirling with questions. What had she started? And what did Adriana mean? That evening, Hyder called Clara into his office once more. The blinds were drawn, and the atmosphere was tense, as though the room itself were holding its breath. "You did well," Hyder said, his voice softer than usual. "Your instincts were right." Clara nodded, but the unease in her chest refused to dissipate. Adriana said something before she left. She made it sound like this isn't over. Hyder leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "She's bluffing. People like Adriana always think they have one last move. They rarely do." "But what if she's not bluffing?" Clara pressed. "What if there's more we're not seeing?" Hyder studied her for a moment, his sharp gaze softening just enough to reveal a hint of something. Unexpected concern. "You're starting to understand how this world works. Good. But don't let paranoia cloud your judgment." Clara left his office with more questions than answers. The sense of victory was muted, overshadowed by the weight of Adriana's parting words. Clara had won this battle, but the war felt far from over. Later that night, Clara sat in her apartment, staring at the blank screen of her laptop. Her phone buzzed, and she froze. Another message. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was a name, Project Horizon. Her pulse quickened. The name Adriana had written in her notebook, the one she hadn't been able to decipher. She quickly searched her files, combing through every document, email, and memo she had access to. Hours passed, and her frustration grew. Project Horizon seemed to exist only in whispers and fragments. Finally, she stumbled across a single encrypted file buried in a shared drive. It bore the title Horizon Overview.docx, and her heart leapt. She clicked it, but a password prompt blocked her. Clara stared at the screen, her mind racing. Who had sent her the name? Why now? And what did Project Horizon have to do with Adriana, or with her? Clara was certain of one thing. She had only scratched the surface of something far bigger than she could have imagined, and she wasn't sure if she was prepared for what lay beneath. Clara sat at her desk the next morning, her eyes glued to the encrypted file titled Horizon Overview.docx. The name had come to her like a ghost in the night, and now it loomed over her like a puzzle begging to be solved. But the password prompt was an unyielding barrier. Every attempt to guess the code was met with the same frustrating error. By mid-morning, Clara couldn't take it anymore. She needed answers. Gathering her courage, she knocked on Hyder's office door. When he called her in, she stepped inside, holding her laptop like a shield. "I found something," she said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "Something called Project Horizon." Hyder froze. It was subtle, just a flicker of hesitation in his normally impenetrable demeanor, but it was enough for Clara to know she'd hit a nerve. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, his tone sharper than she expected. Clara hesitated. She couldn't reveal the anonymous text. "It came up in the investigation," she said carefully. "I found this file, but it's encrypted. I thought you might know more." Hyder leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. "Project Horizon isn't something you should concern yourself with." "But—" "Drop it, Clara," he said firmly, cutting her off. "That's an order." The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Clara nodded and left the office, but her mind was anything but at ease. Hyder's reaction had only deepened her suspicion. Whatever Project Horizon was, it wasn't just another company initiative. It was something far more significant and far more dangerous. Clara spent the rest of the day trying to focus on her work, but the weight of unanswered questions was unbearable. By evening, she found herself back at her desk, staring at the locked file. Hyder's warning echoed in her mind, but her curiosity burned brighter. She opened the company's internal system and began searching for anything related to Horizon. Hours passed with little to show for it, until she stumbled across a series of archived emails buried in a forgotten folder. The subject lines were vague, but one phrase caught her attention: Horizon Protocol Activation. The email threads were fragmented, but they painted a troubling picture. Horizon wasn't just a project, it was a contingency plan, designed to protect Montenegro enterprises at any cost. The details were scarce, but the language was chilling. Phrases like strategic elimination and controlled dissemination suggested actions that went far beyond standard corporate maneuvers. Clara's stomach churned. What kind of plan required such extreme measures, and why had Adriana been connected to it? Her phone buzzed, jolting her out of her thoughts. Another anonymous message: "You're close, but be careful. They're watching." Clara's hands trembled as she read the words. Someone knew what she was doing, someone who wanted her to keep going despite the risks. But who and why? Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed in the empty office. Clara froze, her heart pounding. She quickly closed her laptop and looked around, but the hallway was empty. Gathering her belongings, she left the office in a hurry. The elevator ride down felt agonizingly slow, and when she stepped out into the street, the cool night air did little to calm her racing thoughts. Back at her apartment, Clara pored over the emails again, piecing together what little she could. One name appeared repeatedly in the threads: Victor Landau, the same partner Hyder had recently negotiated with. Victor's involvement in Horizon seemed critical, but the emails gave no indication of his role. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her door. She froze. It was nearly midnight, too late for casual visitors. Her mind raced through possibilities: Adriana, Hyder, or someone far worse. When she opened the door a crack, she found herself face to face with an older man, his features sharp and weathered. He wore a tailored coat, but his posture carried an air of tension. "Clara Mendez?" he asked. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "I'm Victor Landau," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk." Victor Landau's presence at Clara's door was both unexpected and unsettling. His sharp gaze scanned her small apartment as he stepped inside, his movements deliberate and precise. Clara shut the door, her pulse racing as questions flooded her mind. "Why are you here?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the unease swirling inside her. Victor turned to face her, his expression grim. "Because you've stumbled onto something you shouldn't have." "Project Horizon," Clara said, the name feeling heavier now than ever. "What is it?" Victor sighed, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. Horizon isn't just a project, it's a shield and a sword. It's designed to protect Montenegro Enterprises at all costs, even if it means sacrificing people along the way. Clara's stomach twisted. What kind of sacrifices? Victor hesitated before answering. Eliminating competitors, silencing dissent, and if necessary, removing internal threats. Adriana was just a pawn, but she was playing a dangerous game, trying to use Horizon for her own gain. Clara's breath hitched. She wasn't the only one involved, was she? No, Victor admitted. There are others, and they're watching you. That's why I'm here. To warn you. If you keep digging, you'll become a target. The next day at Montenegro Enterprises, Clara carried Victor's warning with her like a shield. She avoided Hyder's gaze during their morning briefing, unsure of how much he knew, or if he was part of the very system Victor had described. But Hyder wasn't a man to be ignored. By mid-afternoon, Clara was summoned to his office. He stood by the window, his back to her as she entered. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "I know Victor came to see you," he said finally, his voice low. Clara froze. "How? I know everything that happens in this company," Hyder interrupted, turning to face her. His expression was colder than she'd ever seen. "And I know you've been looking into Horizon, despite my warnings." Clara braced herself. "I had to. There are too many unanswered questions." Hyder's jaw tightened. "Some questions are better left unanswered." "Why?" Clara demanded, her voice rising. "Because they reveal what this company is willing to do to protect itself." "To protect you?" Hyder's gaze darkened, but there was something else there. Something that flickered between anger and regret. "You don't understand, Clara. Horizon exists because it has to. In this world, power isn't just earned, it's defended, ruthlessly." "And what about the people caught in the crossfire?" Clara shot back. "Adriana? The ones you've removed?" Hyder stepped closer, his voice soft but no less commanding. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I enjoy knowing what it costs? This isn't just business, Clara. It's survival." Clara's breath hitched, her resolve wavering under the weight of his words. She wanted to believe him, but the lines between right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal, had blurred beyond recognition. That evening, Clara returned to her apartment to find another message, waiting for her, this time from Victor. "Meet me at the waterfront. 10 p.m. Bring no one." Clara hesitated, knowing the risk, but she couldn't ignore the possibility of finally uncovering the full truth. When she arrived at the dimly lit docks, Victor was waiting, his expression grave. "They're on to you," he said without preamble. "Hyder's trying to protect you, but it won't be enough. You've seen too much." Clara clenched her fists. "What am I supposed to do? Run? Hide? Pretend none of this happened?" Victor shook his head. "No. You expose it." Her heart raced. "Expose it? And destroy Montenegro Enterprises?" Victor's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "Sometimes destruction is the only way to rebuild." Before Clara could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed across the docks. Victor tensed, and Clara turned to see Hyder emerging from the shadows. His presence was commanding, but his expression was different this time. Vulnerable, almost desperate. "Don't listen to him, Clara," Hyder said, his voice urgent. "Horizon can be controlled. It doesn't have to end this way." Victor stepped between them. "You've already lost control, Hyder, and you know it." The tension was electric, the air thick with unspoken truths. Clara looked between the two men, her mind racing. Victor's warnings, Hyder's pleas, the weight of everything she'd uncovered, all of it pressed down on her. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "This has to end. Whatever Horizon is, whatever it's done, it can't continue." Hyder's gaze softened, his shoulders sagging as though the fight had left him. "Then do what you have to do," he said quietly. "But know this, once the truth is out, there's no going back." The following week, Montenegro Enterprises was rocked by a scandal. Clara had leaked the details of Project Horizon to a trusted journalist, ensuring that the story would be told in full. The fallout was swift and brutal. Executives were fired, investigations were launched, and the company's reputation was irreparably damaged. As for Hyder, he disappeared from the public eye, his once dominant presence reduced to whispers and speculation. Clara never saw him again. Months later, as Clara walked through the bustling streets of the city, she felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. She had done what she believed was right, but the cost had been immense. The truth, she realized, was both a weapon and a wound. The scandal surrounding Montenegro Enterprises erupted like a storm, consuming headlines and leaving chaos in its wake. Clara had expected fallout, but not the emotional toll it would take. As the days passed, she found herself questioning whether she had made the right decision. Exposing the truth had come at a cost. The collapse of Haider Montenegro's empire and the weeks turned bre. Late one evening, as Clara walked home from work, she noticed a familiar figure waiting by her apartment building. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Haitor, leaning casually against the entrance, his tailored coat draped over his shoulders and his sharp eyes softened. I came to Clara's heart raced as she approached him. You disappeared. After everything, you didn't even say goodbye. Haitor's expression darkened, but not with anger, with regret. I thought it would be easier for you if I stayed away, but I was wrong. She crossed her arms, trying to mask the emotions bubbling beneath her surface. Why now? Why come back? Haitor stepped closer, his voice low and steady. Because I realized something during these months away. I built my empire to protect myself, to control everything around me. But the one thing I couldn't control was you. And yet, losing you was the only thing I couldn't bear. Clara's breath hitched, her defenses faltering. You didn't lose me, Haitor. You pushed me away. Haitor's gaze softened. I know, and I'm here to fix that, if you'll let me. The following weeks were unlike anything Clara had experienced. Haider Montenegro, the man who once stood untouchable at the pinnacle of power, now revealed a side of himself she had never seen. They spent hours walking through the city, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, his rise to power, and the loneliness that came with it. Clara, in turn, shared her own dreams and fears, finally allowing herself to trust him fully. Their relationship was no longer marked by tension and hidden motives. Instead, it became something raw and honest, a partnership built not on power, but on understanding. One evening, as they strolled through a quiet park, Haider stopped abruptly. Clara, he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I've spent my life building something I thought would make me invincible, but none of it mattered when I lost you. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. You didn't lose me. You just forgot that I was never after your power. I wanted to know the man behind it. Haider smiled, a rare, genuine expression that reached his eyes. Then let me show you who I am. Not as Haider Montenegro, but as the man who fell in love with you. Clara's breath caught. The words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. For the first time, she saw not the corporate titan, but a man willing to risk his pride and vulnerability for her. As she reached for his hand, the world around them seemed to fade. I've been waiting for you to say that, she whispered. The journey ahead wasn't easy. Haitor worked tirelessly to rebuild his reputation, this time with Clara by his side as both a confidant and an equal. Together, they reimagined what Montenegro Enterprises could be, a company driven not by ruthless ambition, but by integrity and vision. Their love story wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It was about two people who found each other in the chaos of ambition and power, and who chose to build something real from the wreckage. In time, the world came to see Haitor and Clara not just as partners in business, but as partners in life. And though their story was far from conventional, it was theirs, a testament to the idea that even in the shadow of ambition, love could grow and thrive.